So I'm going to talk about a little bit about SweepSouth and the joys or not of starting and building a platform company. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit generally about some of the challenges and opportunities in building a platform company, and then I'll talk about SweepSouth and how those things have played out in our story. So when we think about traditional businesses, we often think about businesses that are very linear in nature. So you have a business that has customers, and those customers are getting services or products from a shop or directly from a producer, and the relationship is linear and it goes in one direction. But what platforms are is that that relationship is often bi-directional, and this is the case in SweepSouth, and the role of platforms like SweepSouth is to be the enabler of those bi-directional interactions and to help with everything from forming the connections between the two sides, trying to aid in transactions between the two sides, or trying to set up rules and regulations for how those two sides interact. And then things can get even more interesting. So instead of having a platform and having two sides on and two players on either side of it, you can have these really interesting looking platforms where you have a whole lot of different nodes, and where you have a platform responsible for making connections and doing all of those things that I talked about between multiple nodes. And that's certainly how we see SweepSouth evolving over the years, and we've started to take steps in that direction. Now, when I initially put this diagram together, and I kid you not, I had like dollar signs for each of those connections, and it was part of my pitch deck. And I would literally, like when I was pitching it to investors, I'd have those dollar signs there to show them that like each node has additional value that it adds to the platform. So the dollar signs have obviously gone because that's just embarrassing. But the concept is the same, is that the more players that you have who are part of this network, the more value that you can add because all of these players are interacting. And the players don't just become either producers of a service or product, but in many cases, and this is the case in the best and biggest platforms around the world, is these producers of products and services also become potentially consumers. And so you can see how if you have people playing multiple roles on this big network that can grow and grow, the value of your business and what you're able to provide can also grow correspondingly. But if you look at that structure, I think intuitively you can guess that it's probably, as it becomes more complex, it comes with more and more challenges. And that's definitely the case. So it's kind of like, you know, build a platform business at your own peril. One of the first pitfalls that is just waiting for entrepreneurs who want to build platform businesses is the danger of losing focus. Right? You start something, you build this thing, it's quite simple, you're going to offer a product or a service through your tech platform to customers, and then all of these shiny other avenues start to show themselves. But the danger of that happening, especially very early in your journey, is that you start to lose focus on the initial core and the thing that's driving all of the initial connections. And that can result in certain death if you're not careful. The other thing is also thinking about resourcing. So although platforms have the benefit of being very light on resources, because this tech platform isn't actually owning any of the products or services itself, it's doing the connections. You do obviously need to have resources when you start adding these different elements to the platform. And so not thinking about the resourcing can also land you in a bit of trouble. And in SweepSouth's case, where this played out is that we facilitate connections between domestic workers and homeowners, initially on demand and then doing it regularly. And we thought it would be a really great idea to try and get into the market of people who have a permanent domestic worker, and to try and look at what we called high frequency bookings at the time. So people who have a permanent, full-time, very regular domestic worker. And we didn't think about the differences between that relationship and what it is that SweepSouth was already providing, and had very, very scant resources that we gave to it. We kind of thought this is like the next iteration of SweepSouth. It didn't quite work that way. Different customer base, different product, different needs. When we needed to iterate that product, we didn't have the resources available, and we ended up needing to can the project. So you have to be careful when you think about what you add. And then vetting and liability. And I talked about platforms, and one of the things that platforms do as being setting the rules and regulations or the terms of how the sides would interact. And this can also have pitfalls. So if I just think about some of the biggest platform companies in the world, the Googles and the Facebooks, and we think about the issues that they've faced, it's because when you take this role of being the person who's regulating and being the gatekeeper, there's also a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And so in the case of SweepSouth, how this plays out is that we have liability that we take on behalf of the SweepStars. But the reality is that SweepStars domestic workers who work on our platform are independent service providers. And so we've got to find a very careful balance between, what are the liabilities that we take on so that we do this work of providing the guarantees, but also are very conscious of the fact that people who providing services or products are independent. And then the last is technical complexity. So I think of it like building a house that has a single bedroom and then thinking about building bathrooms and additional bedrooms and kitchens onto this pre-existing thing. And if you don't think about how that all has to work together and you just add on these structures, you can get into a lot of difficulty and you can build up a lot of technical debt. So those are some of the pitfalls and just some of the things to think about. But obviously this whole evening is about platforms and successful platforms. So it's not all bad news, and there are a lot of opportunities that can come with thinking about your business as a platform. Some of those are that platforms often have really great network effects. So the people who are consuming whatever it is that you're serving through the platform can often be the biggest advocates, and their increasing number and increasing use of the platform can be to your benefit. So in the case of Uber, as an example, the more customers you have using Uber, the more drivers you have on the road, the more nodes you have within a particular area, the cheaper the pricing can be. And so it's essentially a win-win. The other opportunities are the ability to scale. So because you don't own all of these assets yourself, you can scale relatively quickly. And that's something that often is very attractive for investors. They like the fact that this isn't resource intensive, there isn't the risk and the liability of owning all of these things yourself. But also, if something goes wrong with your primary product or service that you're offering, you can often pivot pretty quickly and offer something else. And then players become contributors. So with going to a shop, for example, you go to a shop, you buy something, you take that thing and you leave. But with platforms, because of their because they have a technical basis, because you're collecting data, players often become contributors to really interesting avenues to how these platforms can evolve. And so your customers and your service providers will be the people who will tell you where the direction of your business needs to go. And often they'll have really fresh ideas that you or your team weren't able to think of. And then continuous innovation. So Amazon started off with books. They then branched out into different products. Just the fact that you're thinking about different services and products causes you to think about different markets, delivering different things, and that forces you to think innovatively, to think about what that means in terms of your marketing, your business, the way your business operates, the agility, and that forces you to be innovative and forces a culture of innovation. And then the last thing is better brand awareness, the last opportunity. So if you have multiple services and products and they're all backed by one brand, a SweepSouth that's offering multiple products or services, you're really just able to compound and to double down on that brand awareness and that brand sticking in people's minds through different products and services. So how is this all played out with SweepSouth? So in the 5 years that we've been operational, but I think more recently in the 1 year since we last spoke to the Heavy Chef crowd, I think it was about a year and a half ago, we've had a significant growth. So through some of these opportunities I talked about, we've been able to go from 5,000 to 6,000 SweepStars to over 15,000 on the platform. The majority of these people being previously unemployed, paying out 130 million to domestic workers on the platform. We served about a year ago 15,000 customers a month. It's now 60,000, and we're operating in 8 South African cities with plans to launch internationally, so to launch in Kenya in the beginning of next year with the rest of the continent to follow. And then we've also launched new verticals. So the stuff that I'm saying about platforms and the challenges and opportunities isn't from theory, it's from the experiences that we've personally had in trying to look at different verticals. And so some of those have been, we have SweepSouth, the cleaning platform, which connects domestic workers to customers, but have also launched in beta SweepSouth Connect, which is an on-demand platform that connects handymen and electricians and plumbers to customers. Again, a more on-demand nature, and it's a completely separate platform to SweepSouth. And then also SweepSouth Shop, which provides cleaning products now and soon home products to customers who both use the SweepSouth platforms, but also people who don't. And then we have over 7 million hours of cleaning, and all of that is 7 million hours of data from customers and SweepStars. And all of that has resulted in us being able to raise over 75 million rand in funding over the last 5 years, and 60 million of that came through our most recent funding round, which was led by Naspers Foundry and also had the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation participating. So that's how platforms can really help to positively influence some of the very basic metrics of your business. But I think what's more interesting for me is thinking about some of these unintended consequences that can happen when you're building platform businesses. So in the case of SweepSouth, I'll just talk about 4 quick examples. The first is that when we launched SweepSouth, we went into an industry, the domestic work industry, that wasn't just problematic because of all of the history that the industry had, but it was also problematic because it was a very fragmented industry. It was one where people don't share a lot of data with each other. Domestic workers prior to SweepSouth were going into households one-to-one, working for one employer, and the information about how those interactions take place, what do people get paid, what are the practices around employing a domestic worker, that information was staying within individual households. But as a result of SweepSouth being launched and the business we do and the data that we collect off of the platform from all of these different matches, what we've now done is we've published this annual report on pay and working conditions for domestic work in South Africa. And it looks at what is the average South African household pay a domestic worker, how does that compare to what SweepSouth's paying, but also how does that compare to living expenses and living conditions for domestic workers. And so we didn't just release that into the public and kind of just leave it there. What we used it to do was to challenge the minimum wage around domestic work and to say that based on the study and this collection that of data that we've been able to put together, the national minimum wage for domestic work is completely inadequate to cover living expenses, and we've used that to challenge government around the minimum wage. And then we've also had more practical ways which we've used this data. So that's obviously using it to lobby. But we've seen opportunities to practically look at how we can use partnerships to try and address some of the things that have come up in our study. And so one of the other data points that came across very strongly and quite shockingly was that a lot of domestic workers have their primary breadwinners at home. They have multiple dependents. But despite that fact, apart from a funeral plan, people don't really have insurance that takes care of families if something was to happen to you. And if you're taking care of a grandmother and nephews and nieces and children and they don't have jobs, if something happens to you, that's an entire household of people who become at risk. And so as a result of the data that came out of our own study, we produced this partnership with a startup called Simply, where we provided every single SweepStar on the platform with free life and disability insurance for them and their families. And then they're the more kind of personal stories that come out of it. So we, and I'll just share 2 of them. We had this case of a SweepStar who was studying a law degree, and she was doing it because she was working flexibly through SweepSouth and studying law at the same time. And one of her very many customers who she worked with through the platform had access to the legal industry, and around the time that she was graduating, she was obviously very happy and told him what was happening in her life. And he contacted his networks of lawyers and law firms and was able to get her opportunities to do articles. Now, that's not something that by chance is going to happen if you happen to be a domestic worker who's a lawyer who's working for someone who is a doctor or in some other industry. But the connections and these connections that are the multiple connections that are happening open up these amazing opportunities. And then something that's a little bit closer to home. So we had a SweepStar called Talent, who was working at a customer's home. Talent, very aptly named Talent, was working at a customer's home, and he was busy coding in his study, and she was cleaning behind him, and she picked up that he was working on a MySQL database. And she started questioning him about him, and he was completely blown away about the fact that she understood what he was doing. And he asked her a little bit more about her background, and it turns out she had a computer science degree, but also had a diploma in education. And he was, again, just blown away that this person is someone who's working as a domestic worker. And he reached out to his own networks to see whether there was anyone who was interested. To my immense shame, we didn't know about the qualifications that she had. And so when he reached out, we also picked up the tweets and him kind of publicly broadcasting this. And we ended up interviewing her because we thought, what better person to work on the SweepSouth SweepStar app than someone who has experienced that app as a cleaner, but also has the technical abilities to make changes to that platform. And so Talent is now a junior developer in the SweepSouth team. And the amazing thing is that there are many of these stories, some of them that we probably will never know about, that have come about as a result of these amazing connections that happen between people who see potential in the people who provide them with products and services, and the people who do that work. And then I think, obviously the most kind of encouraging work for us is just the day-to-day and those 15,000 women. And again, the fact that most of these women are mothers, are grandmothers, are taking care of multiple dependents. And we would never have been able to reach the sort of scale that SweepSouth has reached if it wasn't for the fact that we were a platform that was using technology, but that was also a platform that was looking at how we benefit both sides equally. And so the story of these 15,000 women and the 45,000 or so dependents that they have who are now able to go to school, earn a living for their families, etc., is probably the most powerful thing about SweepSouth. And then just to maybe end off, I think the future of platforms, they're becoming more and more ubiquitous around the world. I think they've been led by companies like Facebook and Amazon and Google and Uber that have made a lot of the mistakes for us. So let's not make those same mistakes. But I think the idea of platforms is not going to go away. It's a way of democratizing access to service and products. It's a way of being able to scale them at a very cheap rate. In many cases, it's a way of giving access to someone who is working in Cape Town and is providing a product or service to the rest of the world. So they're an incredibly powerful way of amplifying your business. And so if anyone in the audience is thinking about starting a platform business, I just want to say that it's pretty much a no-brainer. Thank you.